I'll just pick up a few points. I think in general I agree with what the other speakers were saying. Also, Vladimir's point, what is the crucial issue in relation to the rest of the EU, basically, yeah? Because there are lots of crucial issues which are relevant for the internal Greek economic policy design and developments, political developments, but in relation to the rest of the EU, basically the discussion of the debt is the main point. Probably in preparation for this panel, I looked quite a bit at the discussion amongst economists in the EU. And I think if one goes through a lot of mainstream commentaries and rather sound, let's say, properly worked out papers, you find that what is underlying actually the Syriza problem is not too far away from what is the tenor of mainstream debate actually in terms of debt resolution. I'm thinking about a major program by Whiplosh, for example, called Padre, another bigger program designed by one of our speakers recently, Helen Ray, Corsetti, Philip Lane, who had a big paper on workable debt resolution across the European Union. So I think this is one point I will try to explore a bit more. How does it fit into the general economic debate on the framework of debt resolution in Europe? The second point I want to make is, well, it's really a perfect time for Syriza to come to power, because from Syriza's self-interest point of view, it would have been much worse for them to come to power 2 or 3 years ago. And there are a number of reasons, of course. One, some of them you mentioned. There is a quantitative easing program, which is very, very important, I think, for all peripheral countries in terms of a movement away from a zero inflation rate. For a number of reasons. Of course, we have the boost through a lower oil price. And I think you can see in most peripheral countries some turning of the corner. In fact, Greece was the last country which is projected to move towards positive growth in the next year, irrespective of the change of regime. So overall, one can say if a country, a government comes to power which has rather strong social ambitions, if you want, this is a good time to come to power, but also in terms of the general European setting overall. Well, the third point I'll make is basically, which I think was a bit left out from the other speakers, is well, we can't ignore whatever happens to Greece has implications how one deals with a lot of other problem countries in Europe, which is the issue to which extent this finger in the dike is really a serious issue, because overall I think EU is a rules-based entity, and what you apply now in the Greek situation, you have to basically apply to other countries in a similar situation now, but also in the future. So I think one can't see Greece as a singular phenomenon. And I think in that sense I would like to see that as a bridge to a discussion we should have. Probably fourthly, I think I agree with you in your assessment of the Syriza program. I think at the moment it is obviously an election program, yeah? So you give a lot of things and you don't point the fingers to things which might be difficult to achieve. I think the issue, at least from people who study Europe's periphery, which is absolutely important, is this issue of how countries who are long-term current accounts constrained can get out of this. So, and Greece is a prime example, or probably the most extreme example of a problematic economic structure in terms of export capacity, very small export base, but also a very strong lack of diversification of its economic structure. And there's nothing in the program. I hope there are quite a few people in the advisory club around Syriza which are dealing with that issue. But there's nothing written in here. Probably from, if I just might make another point on the program, there is of course a bias which is politically motivated, which is that just like the French Socialist Party, its main electoral base is in the public sector. Yeah? It is of course very keen on poverty issues, etc., But there is also this element of, and difficult to judge in a way, to which extent they really take a stand on the size and the role of the state in the Greek economy, which I think other analysts would say this has to be or had to be rethought in some way. In fact, if one looks, there was one of the papers written by quite a left-wing economist actually, who showed that most of the growth in pre-crisis debt, private sector debt developments, if you calculate it through, was basically public sector wages. Yeah, the overall debt situation can be more or less attributed entirely. There were few other sections of the society which gained from the growth of nominal income prior to that. So I think it seems to be a bit of a vulnerable point from an electoral point of view to address this issue. But let me come back to the first point. How do European economists look at the Greek debt problem? In fact, when one looks at the literature, there are two positions. One says we don't have to do very much, yeah, because the current circumstances are such that Greek debt is sustainable in the current framework, more or less. Basically, more or less following your argument, we have a turning point in real GDP growth. We have quantitative easing, so the overall inflation rates are somewhat higher. And the lock-in of the debt programs, which Greece has already obtained in terms of very long-term maturity of certain debts, not all of it, but some of it, some deferral of when debt has to be repaid to other in terms of bilateral and ECB debt scheduling, plus the very low interest rates in which this debt was offered, means that it's locked in into a very low interest burden over the foreseeable future. Of course, the existing framework might not persist, but if that framework exists, it looks as if the debt issue doesn't point towards a strong non-sustainability. The counter-argument, of course, is that, and quite a lot of economists would also hold that position, is that the debt problem is a huge problem for Europe as a whole. So I think the debt overhang is one of the main stumbling blocks for Europe generally to come to an overall growth path again, and something big has to be done in terms of that debt overhang. But this debt problem is not just a Greek problem. Yeah? In fact, if we think about what is on paper still the aim to achieve 60% debt, is obviously an extremely long-term target which would have to be obtained, and a lot of things have to happen. The issue that the debate which is going to be generated by Syriza's victory is obviously timely in the sense that everybody said that when Greece is going to move towards a primary surplus on the budget, it will change the bargaining position of Greece, but also of many other peripheral countries, and therefore this will become an issue for Europe as a whole. So I think if we look at the literature, the idea of a European debt conference is a generally accepted view by, I think, mainstream economists across Europe, that there is something to be done about the debt overhang. There are interesting worked out programs by quite a few economists. For example, the use of ECB seigniorage. Yeah? There are all sorts of scenarios by which one tries to develop a commitment by basically the Eurozone partners to draw on the future seigniorage, yeah, of the ECB to cover quite a substantial part of sovereign debt of the peripheral countries. In fact, one scheme would suggest one could apply that without any transfers across countries, because every country could borrow on its own future seigniorage in terms of their shares in ECB capital. And there would be, I think, schemes very similar to what you described in Syriza's program, a growth-adjusted drawing on a an administered pool on that seigniorage income, which also would, of course, give it quite a strong financial market position. So I think if you look at the literature on the resolution of the debt problem of Europe, it is seen as a very prime problem, not just in relation to Greece. There are quite a few well-worked schemes on the table, which are basically papers on which this European conference can develop its position. And of course, there is a wide variety in which it is analyzed to which extent these schemes imply transfers or don't imply transfers. There are both schemes possible, and obviously we will find some bargaining structures which will evolve in the course of such a European debt conference to deal with that. So I think it would be interesting for you to, for us to debate that. But the idea of a major push in the direction of thinking about this resolution of very high levels of debt across Europe is obviously a very timely thing to be debated, and it is not a singularly Greece issue. Now, I think Vladimir pointed out quite well in which areas Syriza is basically autonomous and in which areas it is not. The area in which the outside partners can have a stake in it is obviously the path of continued maintenance, either of the debt programs which are already in place and continuation of the debt programs in place. But in terms of the internal fiscal policy structure, spending structures and revenue structures, there is basically autonomy. It's only insofar as it affects the path of external debt, there is an issue of external interference. But of course, once Syriza quite cleverly put into their program, we are not deviating from a balanced budget path for the foreseeable future. I doubt they will keep it forever. There is there is no ground, basically, for any EU partners to interfere into the details of fiscal structures, both on the revenue and the spending side. So I think the details which are in this program is basically up to the Greeks. I'm also skeptical, like my two colleagues, that they are tackling in that program, but of course it's only an election manifesto, some of the most fundamental parts of the Greek economy, and they will go into a problematic growth scenario, at least in the medium-long run, if they don't tackle these issues. In the short run, it's a basically strong demand stimulus, which will have a beneficial effect on growth, but whether they will move back towards major external imbalances, this issue is not addressed. So probably the last point which I want to address is how do we see what is going on in the EU now in the context of general reforms of the European policy framework? Well, I think we might have a lot of sympathy towards peripheral position, or other people might have strong sympathy towards the net payer's position or creditor's position. But I think we have to recognize the reality of the historical phase in which European integration is in. So while one spectrum of opinion would be very much in favor of a much more extensive transfer mechanism in Europe, it is something which is, at the current historical juncture of Europe, unachievable in a very transparent and massive way. Yeah? It might be achievable in a modest way, in a relatively intransparent way, manner, but it is not achievable in a massive way. So I think a lot of the detailed working out of debt issues in Europe basically have to accept that the degrees of the federal transfers will be limited at the federal level. And the issue is basically an issue of mutual interest, finding a compromise where things are of mutual interest, because what economists can contribute is for overall growth of an economy, it doesn't matter just how much is repaid in terms of debt to you, but what matters is how your overall economy is linked together with the destiny of other economies, whether they are in stagnation or contraction, etc. So I think I feel that this part of fully working out the scenarios in which different forms of debt resolution affects growth and individual countries' interests would be a very important task which economists can perform. I should come to an end here. So yes, probably summarizing, I think from the outcome will not be, I agree, I think, with Vladimir on that. I don't see a huge conflictual outcome of the current situation. The issues are manageable, but I think we always have to keep in mind that whatever is done with Greece will be, has to be seen in the framework of what is done with all debtor countries in the EU. So I think one has to find an arrangement which is dealing with that issue across the board.